to do this because this is not I'm speaking. This is the people who want to tell the world what they want to do. North Korea is an unimaginable country. There is only one channel on TV. There is no internet. We aren't free to sing, say, wear, or think what we want. North Korea is the only country in the world that executes people for making unauthorized international phone calls. North Koreans are being terrorized today. When I was growing up in North Korea, I never saw anything about love stories between men and women. No books, no songs, no press, no movies about love stories. There is no Romeo and Juliet. Every story was propaganda to brainwashes about the Kim dictators. I was born in 1993, and I was abducted at birth, even before I knew the words freedom or human rights. North Koreans are desperately seeking and dying for freedom at this moment. When I was 9 years old, I saw my friend's mother publicly executed. Her crime, watching a Hollywood movie. Expressing doubt about the greatness of the regime can get 3 generations of a family imprisoned or executed. When I was 4 years old, I was warned by my mother not to even whisper. The birds and mice couldn't hear me. I admitted I thought the North Korean dictator could read my mind. My father died in China after we escaped North Korea. And I had to bury him at 3 a.m. in secret. I was 14 years old. I couldn't even cry. I was afraid to be sent back to North Korea. The day I escaped North Korea, I saw my mother raped. The rapist was a Chinese broker. He targeted me. I was 13 years old. There is a saying in North Korea, women are weak, but mothers are strong. My mother allowed herself to be raped in order to protect me. North Korean refugees, about 300,000, are vulnerable in China. 70% of North Korean and teenage girls are being victimized, sometimes sold for as little as $200. We walked across the Gobi Desert, following a compass. When they stopped working, we followed the stars to freedom. I felt only the stars were with us. Mongolia was our freedom moment. Death or dignity. Armed with knives, we were prepared to kill ourselves if we were going to be sent back to North Korea. We wanted to live as humans. People often ask me, how can we help North Koreans? There are many ways, but I would like to mention 3 for now. 1, educate yourself so you can raise awareness about human crisis in North Korea. 2, help and support North Korean refugees who are trying to escape to freedom. 3, petition China's stop repatriation. We have to shed a light on the darkest place in the world. It isn't just North Korean human rights. It's our rights that North Korean dictators have violated for 7 decades. We need governments all around the world to put more pressure on China to stop repatriation. In particular, Chinese delegates of One Young World can play a part by speaking up. North Korea is indescribable. No humans deserve to be oppressed just because of their birthplace. We need to focus less on the regime and more on the people who are being forgotten. One Young World, we are the ones who will make them visible. Fellow delegates, please join me as we make this a global movement to free North Koreans. When I was crossing the Gobi Desert, scared of dying, I thought nobody in this world cared. It seemed that only the stars were with me. But you have listened to my story. You have cared. Thank you very much.
Welcome everyone to today's seminar on human rights education. I'm Camilla Kronqvist. Lotta will tell us soon why I'm here. We chose to start this seminar with this video to remind ourselves of why thinking about human rights and working for human rights are important. And doing this work is important on a global scale, where we have to sort of see that we can create freedom for all human beings. But it's also important on a very local scale, in schools, in daycare, where you, as future educators or already educators, need to work to ensure that human rights are made possible in the lives of children and pupils. So this is what we're going to talk about today, how we can ensure that human rights are guaranteed in Finland, where we can enjoy much more freedoms as in North Korea.
My name is Charlotta Hilli, and together with Camilla, I am the editor of our book or anthology on human rights education. And today you will hear two of the authors of this book. Elina Pirjataniemi, she is professor of international law. After her, Salla Tuori, associate professor of gender studies, will give lectures on their topics. There will be time for questions afterwards, and this seminar is being recorded, so I will later on ask you all to use a microphone when you participate. But for now, I think it's time to welcome Elina onto the stage. Please give her a warm welcome.
Okay, dear friends, it's fairly difficult to stand here after the very courageous young woman or girl who we saw at this video. We can, do this to begin with. And in a sense, I feel that everything I'm going to say is rather nonsensical compared to her message. But here I am, I can't do anything else, and I'm going to give my lecture anyway, even though the comparison is very, very hard, of course, to begin with. One of the messages she had actually was that educate yourselves. And I think that when it comes to human rights, education is actually one of the key issues. And I'm a human rights lawyer, and I'm also director of the Institute for Human Rights at the Åbo Akademi, and I look at things quite often from the legal perspective, but that's not the only perspective, and that's not the way how we change the world. It's not the only way we use when we change the world. So that's why I'm very happy that you're here, because you have a very, very crucial role in all this. I'm going to talk about something very hateful, hate speech. But before I can do that, I must do other things. Human beings are very keen on communicating with each other. We do it all the time. We want to tell how we feel and you know, what we are thinking about and how we understand our environment, etc. Sometimes the communication is very discreet. You know, the person who talks too long at a meeting, you start looking at, oh my God, doesn't she ever stop? And that communication is, of course, very important. But mostly we use words. When we want to be very precise, we use words. And I'm focusing on that kind of communication where we use words or images or something, and communication which happens in the public sphere, more or less. So the whispers, the secret whispers we leave outside this time, and I'm only focusing on public communication. My presentation is pretty much based on the article I have written in this anthology, so if you want to check it, do that. And there are also links to my references, etc., cases I mention, etc. So please check the anthology also as regards the other contributions in that. I can warmly recommend every one of them. So my aim today is to analyze, first of all, what hate speech is and how we could address it from a more kind of legal perspective. But before that, I need to go into the question of freedom of expression and its limitations. Then after that, I can go into the more kind of to the main point of my lecture. And then all the time I try to reflect upon, and I ask you to reflect upon, what is the role of law in promoting respectful discourse, and what is your role as future educators as regards promoting respectful discourse. So try to think about it throughout this lecture. So first, what is freedom of expression? What are its limitations? What is then hate speech about? Definition, maybe legal consequences, a bit, some cases, and then finally some reflections on the role of law. And my starting point in all this is that language is always a question of power. And especially legal language is also, it is very much so. It is a very powerful language by which we make definition. We decide what is a marriage. We do it by legal terminology. We decide what competencies I have as a teacher or professor, etc., etc. We try to solve conflicts with judgments that are powerful words. So it is a very specific way of communicating. And that is, of course, something I also ask you to think about when you see my examples and the paragraphs or articles I'm showing to you. The language of law is very specific in a sense that it is very concise. So it's very different from the ordinary language we are using. Not better, but different. So basically, I'm trying to analyze how the law identifies, categorizes, and defines as acceptable communication. And also I'm going to illustrate how this type of discourse works and how it differs from ordinary non-legal communication. And the point is really, I want to emphasize it once more, is that I would like to empower you to critically scrutinize the law and also see your role as educators. What can you do in order to promote respectful communication, freedom of expression, etc. in your work? Okay. So here's a very famous quote which we always need to show when we're talking about freedom of expression. I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. Very dramatic. I don't know whether I'm willing to do it for you, but perhaps, in theory at least, I would maybe consider. Often this phrase is linked to Voltaire. But the funny thing is that it's not Voltaire who has said or maybe he has, but the quotation is actually, the right source is a female historian, Evelyn Beatrice Hall. She has described Voltaire's thinking via this formulation, and we have got a kind of very complex discussion on who actually said this first, and was it Evelyn or was it Voltaire or who was it? So it's kind of funny that the phrase which is used in order to show what freedom of expression is all about is also itself a target of discussions concerning source criticism and so. You know that during that freedom of expression was one of the highly valued issues by Enlightenment philosophers, and traces of that kind of thinking can be seen in all these great revolutions, all the documents that were written after these great revolutions in the end of the 18th century. Freedom of expression was, together with freedom of thought and freedom of information, the kind of new rights that were given to these rational, reasonable citizens who now could think without the restrictions of religion, which was very typical in the medieval time, that it was the religion which told you what to think, how to communicate. So these rights were very essential in this period. And you can see also that they can be seen in many of the old constitutions. Also, freedom of expression is one of the first civil rights one can identify in many kinds of documents. It was also included in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, 1948. I have written it for you here. This formulation is one of many, and the details differ if you look at the European Convention on Human Rights or or the International Covenant and International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, or our Constitution, or whatever. The main idea is pretty much the same, but the formulations differ a bit. And it's not the details here that are important for you, but it's the main message, so to say. So everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference, freedom to seek, freedom to receive, freedom to impart information and ideas through any media and regardless of frontiers. Quite simple, in fact. So everyone has this right, and it covers all kinds of information to begin with. Also, expressions that someone might find very offensive or outrageous, and so. The idea with freedom of expression and the whole kind of Western human rights thinking is that we need to give each other a possibility to express our ideas freely to a certain point, but the threshold is very high when we say that you can't say anymore. This, of course, causes sometimes tensions. I was preparing this lecture in a train, and I was copying this to my PowerPoint presentation, and a gentleman sat besides me and started looking. I was very focused, and I didn't realize what I was doing. But this is a stamp, and it's also an expression of a legal conflict that came into being after it was in 2014 when these Tom of Finland stamps were released. I don't know whether you knew about them. And you know, Tom of Finland is of course very topical at the moment because of the movie and so. And there was a series of stamps that then called Itella, Posten, Posti, whatever it's called nowadays, I don't know. So they launched these stamps. And this is the worst one. I took it because it's the worst one. And of course this very open celebration of homosexuality, which is present in these stamps, it caused all kinds of reactions. And also complaints to the parliamentary ombudsman. And Deputy Parliamentary Ombudsman Maja Sakslin got the case and scrutinized it. That is, are these okay? I mean, can we have this stuff in our stamps? Those who complained about it were referring to, were saying that, well, this infringes common sexual decency, that these things shouldn't be all over the place. And also that it's against anti-tobacco laws and so, not this particular picture, but the other ones, etc., etc. But Maja Sakslin actually said that, okay, first of all, freedom of expression covers all kinds of expressions, also pictures, commercial ones, as these are. Stamps are, of course, commercial products. They can also be seen as pieces, work of art, and so forth. And what is most important in her reasoning is that this is something we just need to tolerate. We need to tolerate each other's expressions, even though we might feel that it's a bit uncomfortable to see someone's, whatever. So that's the way how freedom of expression works, to begin with, that we need to give space to each other's ideas. That's for sure. And it's a very important right in that respect. Well, and freedom of expression, it covers all kinds of expressions, not only the nice ones, and not only rational ones. And it also covers, it is important regardless the medium. So pictures, tweets, blogs, newspaper articles, whatever are protected by freedom of expression. What's also interesting is that freedom of expression should be guaranteed regardless of frontiers. The ideal situation is that we can freely share our thoughts all over the place. North Korea, which we got a glimpse into here earlier, is a very it's a very particular example of a society where there's no possibility whatsoever to share your ideas, and you saw the girl's very powerful testimony how that what kind of impact that has on you and the society. But the situation is not that good in all countries, not even in countries that otherwise might be prosperous, like China, for instance. It is one of the countries that really carefully and in a very skillful manner controls the web, the internet. There are layers of controls, authorities. It's a web of control. So if you travel to China, so don't be surprised if your Instagram, Facebook, or whatever you're using is not really working as the way it normally works here back home. So, but the idea is that our ideas should be able to move freely. Freedom of expression is, of course, very important as such, but it's also very closely linked to democracy. And I think that the North Korean example shows very clearly that if you don't have freedom of expression, it's highly likely that the society is not very democratic either. Here you see a nice ranking. Finland is the one for number one here. It's a ranking from World Press Freedom Ranking from 2016. We were seventh time in the row, number ones when it comes to a position as number one country as regards press freedom. It's a very good ranking, I would say. I can come back to that, but this ranking was made before the famous Yle crisis. And those who know say that it might have had an impact on our ranking, actually, the whole discussion around Yle. So don't be surprised if we are going down next year. It will be thrilling to see. Anyway, these kind of rankings, they are done on the basis of criteria which I quickly show to you here. These are the criteria they are checking. It's Reporters Without Frontiers, an organization that is checking all the countries and what is the situation of pluralism in different countries, media independence, self-censorship, is there any traces of that? How does the legislative framework look like, and so forth. So these are the criteria, and after that they rank countries. And so far Finland has been very good in these rankings. We need to be happy about this, of course. But at the same time, it's important also to emphasize that these rankings are not given. And the discussion concerning Yle, our public broadcasting company, which has been going on now for a while, it's a very good reminder that we need to all the time be very, very careful and alerted somehow that something, there might be something going on. So press freedom is extremely important, and the discussion around public broadcasting company Yle is also extremely important. I kind of assume that most of you have been Finns or have a relationship to Finland, but those of you who do not know, maybe you have followed the discussion that we have. Our Prime Minister was a bit unhappy about a piece of news which led to a interesting email exchange with him and a female reporter. Our Prime Minister sent 17 email messages to a reporter, very critical, which is of course not very clever from a Prime Minister, but well, he did it anyway. Finally he stated, and I quote now, "I have zero respect for Yle right now, which does not differ from your respect towards me. We are even." And then we got this discussion, was this, is he threatening, and were the 17 emails threatening, etc. And it also led to a situation where some journalists left Yle because they thought that, okay, within Yle, they are not allowed to write as they want, they are not allowed to criticize, for instance, Prime Minister as they want to, etc. So that is going on. The discussion concerning Yle is going on. There's now an independent investigator, Professor Olli Mäenpää from University of Helsinki, who's going to scrutinize what is really going on in Yle. And that's the way how we should react, of course, in a society which respects freedom of expression. Immediately, if we think that, okay, now something is happening, so we should react. So freedom of expression is important for democracy, it's important for our kind of self-development, it's important for art, science, it's important for commercial entities, etc. So it has many aspects indeed. Quite often when we talk about freedom of expression, we meet arguments according to which it's an absolute right. I have absolutely the right to say whatever I want to. That's not true. Strictly speaking, that's not true. It's not an absolute right. Actually, in fact, we do have very few absolute rights. Prohibition of torture is one of those, but freedom of expression, you may limit it to according to some criteria, which I'm coming back to. It's interesting, here you can see the limitation clause, which I have included from European Convention on Human Rights. I just took it as an example. You see it here. We are coming back to this. It's interesting to see that in different countries we have maybe a bit different ways to address freedom of expression. And a very significant difference we can find is actually between Europe and US. You may know it that US have a very liberal view on freedom of expression. It's much more liberal than the European way. And you can see it, for instance, in a way how their president is expressing himself, for instance, in Twitter. That wouldn't be really possible for a European president, at least so far. What do we know? But the reason for this difference is, of course, cultural and historical. European human rights documents have been created mostly after the Second World War. So the Holocaust and all that is present in the documents. And it was very clear when the drafters of for instance, European Convention on Human Rights were gathered together and discussed about the different formulations, that they had in their minds the propaganda machinery from Nazis in their heads. Okay, we don't want to have that, so we need to put some limits. Whereas US do not necessarily, as a nation, have that kind of legacy. So there are some differences, but not even in the US is freedom of expression limitless. What can then happen if you, and why is that important to begin with, is that, of course, when we communicate something, we use power. And the words we use lead to consequences. So it's very important that we also bear responsibility over the stuff we say and do. So it brings with it, as it's called here, particular duties and responsibilities. But in order to restrict someone's freedom of expression, there are a very particular criteria that are present. First of all, these restrictions, limitations must be prescribed by law. Law meaning parliamentary law, so you really get the kind of democratic control included into this. They need to be necessary in a democratic society. So what is necessary in a democratic society? That is a question that needs to be pondered upon. And for some reasons, particular reasons, or in order to protect some interests, we may restrict. And you can see here a list of reasons: national security, public safety, prevention of disorder or crime, etc. These kinds of lists you can find in different constitutions and in different international documents. So there you can, for these reasons, you can restrict in law if it's necessary in a democratic society. So there are many thresholds in order to keep our freedom as vast as possible. I have here a link. I'm not going to open it now. We don't have time for that. But in order to, in addition to the fact that state as such may limit in legislation our freedom of expression to some extent, we have also something called self-regulation. That is, that the media as such limits itself and controls itself. And now I'm not talking about self-censorship, but responsible journalism. And you can check Council for Mass Media, their website, the guidelines for journalists. What do they have as their guidance when they are doing interviews, or how do they address sources, etc. It's a very good list to check in order to create an understanding of what is respectable or responsible journalism, responsible communication. There is also a list of cases, if you're interested, what kind of, you can do complaints to this council if you feel that your rights are infringed by a story in a newspaper, etc. You can see here in the web what kind of cases have been put forward. Well, if we move then beyond freedom of expression, then here we are coming very close. I'm here citing, quoting, showing to you the Finnish famous or infamous journal called MV journal. I'm not going to say what it's in Finnish proper. Why I'm showing this is that we do have media that do not follow the self-regulatory normative guidelines. And they publish whatever. And they are there all over the place. I want you to focus on this illegal migrant faked a suicide attempt in Helsinki. Do you recognize this story? Yeah. Is that your understanding of what happened in Helsinki? No. And that's the way how they work. It's total nonsense they publish. And as freedom of expression, one very important aspect in it is that we have no prior censorship, so that you may publish whatever. If you publish things that are not true or insulting and so and go, then you might be punished for it, but you may throw out all kinds of stuff. And this is, of course, from the perspective of that people actually publish this, it's a bit of a problem. Because this, of course, is clearly creating an image that something very strange is going on in Helsinki. What? Illegal migrants, fake suicides. What is this? So this is a very crucial challenge for us now, to be very source critical. What are the sources that are reliable? And I can imagine that for your students and for our kids, it's even more puzzling. I mean, they have their telephones and they check all kinds of stuff. So you all the time need to, how do you know that? I think that's a very good question to ask always. How do you know that? What's your source? So it's very important for us to be very, very source critical. So about beyond then freedom of expression, what happens there? We are coming closer to hate speech. We have, in several international conventions concerning human rights, we have something called prohibition of abuse of rights. That is, the ideology is that you can't ever use a right in order to destroy someone else's rights. You always need to find a balance between rights. You can't, by referring to your right, empty someone else's. A good example is that I have a right to privacy, but I'm a semi-public person, so to some extent journalists have a legitimate interest to scrutinize what I'm doing, even though I have right to privacy. We have freedom of expression that includes freedom to get information, and we have right to privacy. These need to be balanced. We need to find a good balance between that. And many other examples I could add. So we have these prohibitions of abuse of rights. And that also means that you can't use your freedom of expression in order to publish whatever stuff and then just say, oh, hey, come on, freedom of expression. I'm sorry, it was very offensive. So that is something we do have. We also have more particular, in international covenants, we are not going into details here, but you may find the very particular prohibitions that you shouldn't. For instance, we have in the convention called, where was it? Elimination of all forms of racial discrimination. We have a stipulation which Finland has ratified. We have a stipulation that all state parties are obliged to condemn all propaganda and all organizations which are based on ideas or theories of superiority of one race or group of persons, or one color or ethnic origin, or which attempt to justify or promote racial hatred and discrimination in any form. So that kind of organizations should be condemned. So that kind of prohibitions you can find. And it's, of course, on a general note, it's very easy to accept all these limitations, both the limitations that are within the freedom of expression and also these other, but in practical situations, it's very, you know how expressions are. They are not that clear cut. We have these gray zones, and it's the gray zones that are most difficult. And it's there precisely, you as teachers, as educators, you are there in the gray zones with the kids and the young adults and whatever, and discussing with them, and is it okay to publish this Instagram photo? Or, and it's difficult. It's really difficult. I have here a quote concerning something called concluding observations. All international covenants have some sort of a body that is controlling the implementation of the convention. And here I have the same convention I mentioned earlier. They have checked through the situation in Finland concerning racial discrimination and then made some recommendations for us. And it's interesting that the committee is a bit worried about our situation and diplomatically recommends that we reinforce our efforts to combat incitement to racial hatred and racial discrimination, especially on the internet. So, and this can be seen also in other reports, that we seem to have something going on in the internet, and we should really focus on that. When it comes then to the word hate speech, there's no universal definition of what is it. It would be easy if we had, but we do not have. We use normally in Europe a definition which is included in a recommendation by European Council of Europe, and you can see it here. So it covers all forms of expressions which spread, incite, promote, or justify racial hatred, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, or other forms of hatred based on intolerance, including intolerance expressed by aggressive nationalism or ethnocentrism, discrimination, hostility against minorities, migrants, and people of immigrant origin. So this is the definition we are working with, but you can't find it in a convention or in our criminal law or so. This is the one. So, and as I said earlier, the difficult part is that we do not have prior censorship, which is a very good thing. But that means that everybody has, in principle, a possibility. You have your laptops and mobiles there. You can send out whatever. And then what we can do after, we can sanction afterwards. But we have very limited possibilities in beforehand to from the perspective of law, to do anything. And there, education comes in. Education in all forms is extremely important in order to get us to a situation where we are more able to have a good constructive dialogue. So law doesn't fix it. We can only create some limits, and we can come back afterwards. Okay, this wasn't good, and we're going to fine you or whatever. But in order to really work efficiently, hinder hate speech, educate. I have here some examples how hate speech is seen in our criminal code, kind of formulations. Find there. Take just examples. One way of something called ethnic agitation. In Swedish, it's hetsfolk. This is often used in more cases concerning ethnic agitation, and here you can see the formulation. This is a very typical criminal code formulation, very precise. And in a criminal court, when we are analyzing whether a text is ethnic agitation or not, then a judge looks every single word here. Okay, was it available to the public? Yes, no, yes. Was it an expression where a certain group was threatened? Yeah. Defamed, insulted, maybe, on a certain basis? Yeah. So you see, all the time, every word is important. And the problem with criminal law is that it's either or. You are either guilty or not guilty. So if the judge is unsure, was this ethnic agitation or not, then it's better not to judge. So that means that many of the expressions we feel intuitively as citizens or people, this was not good thing to say. This is offensive. This is dangerous to say this one. It might be that from a criminal law perspective, it's okay. It's not okay to say it, but it's the threshold. We are not over the threshold yet, and that's also a good reason for you to be very alerted, because you are the ones who can make a very huge difference as regards hate speech. I could show other formulations as well, but it's not so important. You see the example. I took, just in order, because this was very topical, yesterday, Germany's Minister of Justice actually said he would propose a law that would impose stiff fines on companies whose social media platforms are not really responding to illegal content. This is a direct copy from a Facebook site. So there are things happening. Many politicians are tired of the fact that nothing is done with these kind of examples. Facebook is refusing to destroy this. It's there. But I don't know whether tougher laws are really the answer to this. That's for you to think about. Sanctity of religion is also something which is often used in these cases. Quite often, offensive talk, offensive expressions are directed against someone who has a different religion than your own. So that is something we can use, and there are several others. Every time we check, when a criminal judge needs to analyze, is this offensive in a sense that we should think that it's ethnic agitation or otherwise offensive or not, then judges are putting the thing into a context. What is the context in this? And I show you two, these are totally, I made them up, they are not real tweets, but they could be. One is, the tweet number one is, our government's asylum policy is bullshit, it's only killing innocent people. That's tweet number one. Not very elegant, but tweet number two, Islam is bullshit, it's only killing innocent people. I have just changed some words. The first one is directed against our government. It's not elegant, it's not nice, we shouldn't talk like this, we should have better arguments than that, but it's okay. We can criticize elite quite a lot, they need to tolerate quite a harsh criticism as well. Whereas this latter one, Islam is a minority religion in Finland. People who are Muslims, they belong to a minority. They are assumably in a vulnerable position in our society. It changes the context of the tweet as they are in a vulnerable position. I would say that tweet number one is already there we might have a case. So what the judge is that he or she analyzes, so what was the circumstances when this tweet was published, which was the audience, what was the discussion before and after, etc. But in criminal law you can't go that far. It's quite restricted, the context, what you can take into account. And that makes it also difficult for criminal law to really solve these problems, because you can't really check all the discourses that are going on in a society, whether these tweets were detrimental to the debate culture in general. Also, it's only that were these tweets ethnic agitation. Then we have several other things. I mentioned here finally a case called which involves wannabe party leader of the True Finns, Jussi Halla-aho, who is a member of European Parliament at the moment. He is also a very famous blogger, and he is also famous for the fact that he was convicted for ethnic agitation and disturbing religious worship by the Supreme Court. Not maybe a best thing to have in your CV. But this is only a one passage from the judgment, but what he did was that he blogged about all kinds of things, and very anti-migrant blogs, and he had these citations, citing him, robbing passers-by and living on taxpayers' expense are cultural and possibly genetic characteristics of Somalis. This passage or this blog was analyzed by the Supreme Court is this ethnic agitation. What he had done, Jussi Halla-aho, was that he was trying to be sarcastic. He was referring to another Finnish columnist who had been writing a column on Finns, ordinary Finns of us, drinking excessively and fighting when drunk are cultural and a possibly genetic characteristic of Finns. That's of course very offensive. We don't want to have these characteristics. So he changed the word, he made the switch which I made. And I maybe tried to prove a point, but he was convicted. And you may check the Supreme Court case if you want to, how the Supreme Court reasoned. And the point was there really that, okay, you can't really, I mean, Somalis in Finland are in a vulnerable position. It's totally different to direct target these words towards a minority than towards us as a majority. And the interesting thing is that Halla-aho, of course, is a politician. And politicians, all in all, they need to have, and they need to have very huge freedom as regards what they say and what they think. That's very important in a democracy. But at the same time, people are listening to them, so they also should be very responsible. So that's also something that the court needed to balance, that, okay, was there a balance met or not? So, what I'm thinking about now is that we have time for some questions and so, but I really want you to think about back home that what's your role in all this? I have tried to show that we have laws, we have criminal code, we have international conventions, we have all that. It's good to have, but it doesn't help us if you do not do your work and I do mine. So we really need to educate. Any questions? It's always, of course, difficult to hear too, but we have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Elina. Please raise a hand if you have a question, and I will quickly check Twitter as well and give you some time to think.
Are these questions that you think about? What to post, what YouTube videos to post, or what Instagram pictures to post? No?
I think for a lot of teachers today, especially maybe after this year, we think a lot about the fact that students can film teachers.
Oh,
and
yes.
Put videos online. And do you know, I mean, what are the legal repercussions of that?
That's also a really tricky question, as classrooms basically are public places. So, but it depends on the context. It depends on the context and what's the motive with your video. If you're unlucky, you may be convicted for defamation of character if you really are showing the teacher in a very bad light, even though it's true what the teacher does. So and that is the thing that makes this very tricky, this situation, that it's the context where what did the teacher do, what was the situation, what happened before, why did you take that video, what was the purpose of it. So it's difficult to say. It's dangerous out there for teachers.
I think it's a new world for teachers.
It is, yes.
And students.
And it's also, I mean, I have teenagers, so I'm following closely their media use and how easy it is to take all kinds of videos and post them to friends. And then they start spreading all over the place. So I don't know whether it's good for good advice, but I've told them that don't post anything that you wouldn't want me to see. So I'm a rather liberal person, but I think it's because the kids are also in danger. If they are over 15, they are criminally liable for the stuff they put out there. And I'm not sure, I mean, 15-year, they can be very clever and they are young people, they're fantastic, but huge mistakes can happen also. So I don't think that the kids are really thinking that when they post a YouTube video somewhere that they are really publishing something, they are responsible for that. Maybe also criminally if they are over 50.
Mm-hmm. And after these lectures we will also have seminars where we will discuss bullying, and bullying online is of course a very... Bullying is not new, but online bullying is new.
Yeah, and it's the problem with all this, we have had this before. But the problem is that we can share it with the whole world. So bullying becomes also much more tricky or much more offensive if it's two persons who see it in a classroom. Well, it's nasty, but it's 200 people who see a YouTube video, some 2,000, hundreds of thousands. So the kind of magnitude of things that can happen also make these things more difficult.
All right, I think we don't have any more time, but thank you so much, Elina. It was very interesting to get a perspective from your legal point of view. And now it's time to change the perspective, and we are turning to a norm-critical perspective with Salla Tuori. Welcome, and give Salla a hand as well. Annars den här funkar också, men det beror på vad du vill stå.
Okay, it works fine, does it? Yeah. So my name is Salla Tuori and I'm Associate Professor of Gender Studies at Åbo Akademi University, and I'm going to talk about norm-critical perspectives on gender and raciality in a school context. So we'll continue. I'm also talking on the basis of the article I've written in the anthology. I'm not going to go through everything I've written in the anthology, so there will be more examples, more materials, there's also more further readings and all that kind of things you can look at if you look at the article. But you'll get a glimpse of what it is about and what does it mean to think norm-critically. And I think it follows nicely with what Elina was talking about from a legal perspective and from the perspective of hate speech. Now we're not looking so much at hate speech that I was going to say something as extreme as hate speech, but unfortunately it's quite mundane in many ways at the very moment here, so we are, it doesn't seem very extreme, although the content, as we saw in Elina's presentation, is extreme. But we're looking at when we look at the norm-critical perspective, we look at the normal, we look at something which is truly mundane, it's everyday, assumptions we don't really think about so much, but that very much structure the way we are working with. So it is kind of coming into the same things Elina was talking about, but from a bit different perspective. I start from the curriculum, and there is a fairly new curriculum to the schools. I'm not a researcher who does research on schools, but I've been looking at the materials now that have been made for teachers. But do think about, with your experience from school, from your experience of teaching, so please do think about your questions in relation to that. So that's what you experts in, and I'm expert in the perspectives that I'm talking about. But the new curriculum, as probably the previous one, there is a big change. There are big changes, but also talked about the right for pupils to be recognized. And this is now the translations here are now mine, and they're not very polished, they're quite quick, but this is a quotation from the curriculum. Everyone has the right to grow to their full potential as a person and a member of the society. To achieve this, the pupil needs encouragement and individual support. The pupils need to feel that they are heard and appreciated in the school community, and that they get support for learning and well-being. Equally important is the experience of participation and contribution to the joint work and well-being. So this is something quite crucial in school, that everybody is seen as who they are and have a possibility to develop their abilities to grow as a person. And what I'm interested in here, what are the conditions, what are the structures in which individual pupils can be recognized as who they are and can be heard as who they are? And what does it mean that a pupil is heard? It is not only something that is about individual communication, it is also about a sensitivity to structures, a sensitivity to histories that form us as we are, as we come in this room, which are something related to power relations, about structures in the society that go beyond us as persons, as individuals. The lights here are really coming to the classes, so I kind of am seeing you in this light. I'm going to read a quote from Koko Hubara, who is a blogger, and this is her new book. The quotation, again my poor translation, is not from the book, but I wanted to put the book cover just to, you might know the book. But the quote is from her blog. In school, there were no children, let alone adults, who looked like me. My history wasn't taught. Adults in my family were workers, and therefore I was often also seen as one, despite of my grades. On TV and in newspapers, there were nearly only white people. It was, and still is, nearly impossible to acquire knowledge of who I am and what I can become. That I can become anything. I needed to develop other kinds of skills and means to acquire the knowledge I really needed. I needed to listen in situations that first seemed uneventful, to listen to small signals, and to change my plans suddenly. I needed to learn to trust in myself and that my knowledge is relevant, although it is not yet taught anywhere. So Koko Hubara, and you will find if you follow other people, other racialized people in who are blogging. I mean, Mariam Abdul Karim is somebody who you might know, and if you don't, check up what she works with. Descriptions of experience, or what is it, and what kind of experience is it to go through a Finnish school education as a non-white person, as a person who is not attached to Finnishness in the same way that the school assumes pupils to be. Obviously, she's in a lot of ways Finnish. So I'm interested in what happens here. Why are not everybody recognized in the same ways? What do these experiences relate to? And Judith Butler, who is a central researcher in about gender and sexuality, is kind of one of the big things that she has looked at from the perspective of gender sexuality is how certain people become impossible, illegible, unrealizable, unreal, and illegitimate when their gender is somehow perceived incoherent. When people are not being so you can't, if people are not being read, or there is something about that is disturbing from the outside perspective that kind of disturbs so much that you are not read, you're not placed anywhere. So that's a very central thing to her theorizing to start to think about what happens here. And she talks a lot about when for instance, gender expression is not in coherence with sexuality as is understood in a heteronormative world. And this has all kinds of violent consequences, obviously. So it is a lot about what is considered as normal, what is considered as typical is perhaps a better word. I'm using the word normal, but you can also think about what you think as a typical, which you might not think is, it's not that bad. Most of the people seem to be in this typical way, so it is the majority. But when you think about there is a typical pupil or somebody you assume people to be in a certain way, you get in with normality. You also get in with who is the one that is setting the standard, who is the one that fits in, who inhabits the norm. And there is a lot of trouble with what is understood as the norm and what is understood as normal. So I'm going to talk about, and I'm talking in the article about norm critical perspective. And this is something I assume that you have heard of, have you? Norm critical pedagogy. Well, it is a big thing, so I thought you might have heard about it. There is a lot of new material for schools that is written from norm critical perspectives. There is a guidebook that I don't have the reference here, but I have the reference in the anthology. In Swedish it is called Jämställdhet är en kunskapsfråga. Gender equality is a question of knowledge. And that guidebook is based on the new curriculum that I had the very little quote in the beginning. So it is a guidebook for teachers on how to put in practice. What does it imply to follow the kinds of understandings of gender that are baked in the curriculum? What does it mean? How to do it in school? And it is a quite substantial guide. And that guidebook, it doesn't say in the guidebook that we are doing a norm critical guidebook, but it is on a norm critical perspective. And there is also a lot of other material. This is also from, the big picture is also from a norm critical material to schools and also to different organizations to use in their work. And that you can read from Heidi Henriksson's article in the anthology, also from the similar kind of work. So norm critical perspective, and norm critical pedagogy, instead of focusing on the different and the deviant, you focus on the normal and the privileged. So you not only focus on how LGBT pupils are encountered in the schools, or what kind of, how is bullying sexist, racist, and sexualized and targeted to specific people, but you also look at how our privileged position, how is the normal, how is whiteness, Finnishness, heterosexuality constructed and reinforced in the school. So we look at the mundane, at the normal. And of course, norm critical, I have a discussion about norms, and we had a meeting with the anthology group, and of course the lawyers were looking at me like, you're talking about norms, norms are something very different from our perspective. And I'm going to lead you a bit through what the norms here mean. But of course, norms can be, we talk about norms as social and cultural rules that are sanctioned. And sanctioned means that they are, you get the kind of, you are prized for inhabiting the norm or for behaving according to the norm. And you get some kind of, you're kind of punished of not following the norm. So the sanctioned part is very important. And obviously it can be legal, it can be legally sanctioned. Not giving legal frameworks don't give you prizes, but school can give prizes. You can get an encouraging smile, or you can be looked at in a way that questions your being in a place, for instance. But norm critical, but norms can be, I mean, they are social rules and regulations. They can be also, you know, non-violence can be a norm, and it's a good norm. You know, norms as such are not bad. But when we look at norm critical pedagogy and the norms, we look at norms that make people invisible, that reinforce power relations. So we look at ways in which we have such a strong understandings, for instance, about gender, about how girls are or how boys are, or that all pupils are girls or boys, that makes us not see people who fall out of the norms, who don't inhabit the ways in which we understand. So we look at, that's why it's a norm critical perspective. And here I put, it's about structural power relations, it's not about you. Obviously it is about you, and it is about me, it's about all of us. We all are positioned in particular ways. But I wrote there, it's not about you, that it's not about, you know, but I'm quite a nice person, so I kind of, so that if you think about yourself as a teacher, obviously you can do, as Elina said, you can do, improve, I could improve the performance. But I don't know if it's about the color of the, anyway. So here, just to understand that there are a lot of things that are not really related to you as a person. It is about structures. It is about histories of how we come here. You know, it is, when we talk about raciality and we talk about gender, it is a lot of things that we don't choose. It is a lot of things that we are part of a structure, whether, you know, we like it or not. And it has implications. And I have, for instance, in the article, there is a link to Peggy McIntosh's nice, very classical knapsack of 51 or 53, I can't remember, privileges that she listed that she has as a white person in the US. It is from 80s or something, but it's a good thing, it's a good one. It has been written about and reformulated. So there you can see that as a white person you have certain privileges, and it's not about, you know, whatever you do, you still inhabit that kind of position in many ways when walking around in the city. So you know, things like you can go walk around in shabby clothes and it doesn't affect how you are perceived in a shop or whatever. So it's a very different kinds of levels you can look at that. So it's not about you at the same time as it is, of course, about all of us. And we have a responsibility, obviously. So I thought that I'll do a little bit on norms and normativity through the concept of heteronormativity. It's a horrible choice because it's a horrible word to say many times in a presentation. You can try heteronormativity, so you get kind of mixed up in the middle. Yeah, so I already said norms are social and cultural rules, privilege and deviance that are sanctioned. And I think it's it's from Sarah Ahmed, who I refer to quite a bit in the article, to understand inhabiting a norm as a form of comfortability. So inhabiting a norm, a gendered norm, a sexualized norm, a racial norm, can be understood as a comfortable position. And obviously, feeling comfortable is not something you notice. It's impossible to notice every time you things go smoothly. Every time you just kind of blend in. You just go to a meeting and it's just a meeting and it doesn't have any extra layers. So it's kind of comfortable. And obviously that's not something you would pay attention to. And that is what it feels like inhabiting a norm. Then obviously not inhabiting a norm can mean that you go to a meeting, you might need to think a lot of other things in addition to the agenda of the meeting. Or you feel uncomfortable in specific ways. And I like the heteronormativity is a good example now to take because of the very clear recent legal changes. So it's quite good to see in what ways a cultural change, a societal change go together with a legal change, or go together or not go together. So you might be familiar with the debates and the recent Equal Marriage Act, whatever that would be called in a more proper way, I don't know. Just Marriage Act. And here you see a short, if you don't know about the history of like legal changes in relation to homosexuality in Finland, there is 71 decriminalization, 81 removed from the medical classification. That's not strictly a legal change, but I put it still there. First, 99 was an encouragement section moved. Until 99, it was legally sanctioned to encourage a person under 18 to homosexuality. And that actually had implications to, for instance, cultural institutions. What kind of theatre plays can you do? Does it encourage the homosexuality? So, and that's 99, it's not very, it might feel long time for you, but I think it's just a few years back. Anyway, 2001 registered partnership, so there was, it was nearly like a marriage, but not really. You can't really call it a marriage and so on. And 17 Equal Marriage Act comes to force. So there has been a lot of changes in quite short time in relation to LG people. Let's not be too, the words or the, we easily say the whole thing, LGBTIQ, but this is really about quite narrowly about lesbians and gays. So I want us to think for a while about marriage and heteronormativity and the quite complex relation between them. The first thing, of course, is what we think about is that it is that the equal marriage challenges heteronormativity. It opens the marriage, the institution of marriage, to same-sex couples, and doesn't make difference and doesn't mark out as it did with the registered partnership. And it has been a tough political process. It hasn't been easy. It wasn't, there was, even in the last round, and this has been debated since like mid-90s until now, every 5 years or something. So it has been a difficult debate with all kinds of arguments have been heard in the parliament about it. A lot of material for researchers doing their doctoral thesis. There are several very good ones on analysis of the parliamentary debates. So it has been a long and difficult debate. And then heteronormativity, I assume that I have an understanding that heteronormativity has come into like normal language, so that it's not anymore so much a concept, but it's kind of a word, a description. So you would know, you would have an understanding of what heteronormativity means. I would imagine. And then it would be about an assumption, in an everyday meaning, it would be about an assumption of everybody being heterosexual, and that heterosexuality has a privileged position. And obviously, the Marriage Act challenges in some ways the privileged position, because it is not, for instance, the institution of marriages is not only open for people who presumably are heterosexual. Obviously, we also don't know what the sexuality of the people who marry are, but anyway. I like the Berlant-Warner description of, they have a long definition of heteronormativity, which is quite good, but they end it with saying that, and they also talk there about that heteronormativity, that not all heterosexual practices fall under heteronormativity. And if you start to think about it a little, there is actually quite a bit that, although you would have sexual relations between people who are of different sex, supposedly, they don't fall into the tacit society founding rightness of heteronormativity. And Gail Rubin has this lovely charmed circle from 71 where she has illegitimate and legitimate sexual practices. You can look at it at some point if you want. So does the Equal Marriage Act challenge heteronormativity? Do you want to answer? What do you think? What is it about? Okay, I'll continue my monologue. I think it does in many ways. It has definitely, the debates on the Marriage Act in Parliament, in public, have definitely shaped public discussion in profound ways. In ways that there are much more discursive space to talk about homosexuality or non-heterosexual relations, about, so there is, changes have happened. Obviously it also opens up the marriage institution. But there has also been a lot of criticism about, and this is a criticism which has been a lot from inside LGBTIQ, now I say the whole thing, politics. Because you can also think that, okay, now a bit more people who want can marry, so they can enter the institution of marriage. What does it do? You can also think it reinforces marriage as an institution even more. It reinforces a specific kind of life that is assumed for people as ideal. You know, as a grown-up, you work, you married, you get your children, you live in one place, whatever. Get the dog and the car and the rest. Yeah. And I'm talking too much. Yeah. So there is also a lot of criticism that it is not at all, you know, just the fact that also people who are of same sex supposedly marry, challenge such a heteronormative institution as marriage, but rather reinforces it. This picture, I don't know, you might find it just beautiful, but also a bit provocative, isn't it? To look at that this is what the huge debate and politics that were being done. So is it listed under the... they still want me to improve the presentation. Okay. And also that it has focused the LGBTIQ politics a lot around marriage. And that leaves a lot of people outside, a lot of ways of living outside. So it's also a very exclusionary practice of focusing on marriage. So we can also, and I think there is not, I mean, obviously there are people who say very strongly that it does not challenge, or it does challenge, but that's not the point really. It does challenge in many ways. I mean, you can, and then in other ways, it doesn't challenge. So normativity and heteronormativity is complex. But now I need to go to, I had some nice examples here, so I need to speed up a bit, because I just have a few minutes left. So if we want to have a bit of a discussion. If you don't feel very talkative, then I can talk a bit more though. So I did talk about this actually already, about sexual and gender diversity in schools, and that there are, through the new curriculum, there is also a need for knowledge for teachers in a different way that the previous curriculums pressed. So there is actually, from school as an institution, now requires, I mean, now I'm a bit making it stronger probably than it is, but anyway, as I read the guidebooks and the curriculum, it requires teachers to have knowledge on issues of gender diversity and sexuality in a very different way than it has previously. And what I also want with this presentation and the article is that it is also not a question of something you can't learn. You know, this is about, I think the title of the jämställdhet is kunskapsfråga is good in the way that it is about knowledge. It is something that you can educate yourself about. And there is a lot of material to do that with. It requires self-reflexivity, and it requires a bit of thinking about your own position also. So it is knowledge in that way, not just reading and learning in a superficial way. But school is a specific place, so people who are who identify or whose identities somehow challenge the sexual and gender norms usually have quite negative experiences from school. So there is something specific about schools here, and that's according to research from 2013 and 15. Teaching materials are also normative. There are lovely quotes in the material about when people tell about the instances in school and how they felt when I mean, lovely, they're not lovely, they're horrible, but they're very enlightening, and how when they were themselves positioned in a very specific ways in relation to the material that was taught, for instance. Very typical way is to talk about homosexuality as something which is somewhere quite far away and not a part of here, and then a lesbian student would be like, hey, but you know, I am, and then the teacher would be, oh, I didn't think of, you know, that. So there would be different situations, so you can go and read more. School is a gendered environment. There are lots of norms about to be a boy or a girl, and how to be a boy and a girl. Teachers and educators relate differently to people they read as girls and people they read as boys, and give, for instance, different amount of attendance to boys and girls, which this cartoon plays on. It says, welcome to the day's seminar. I think we'll do as we usually do, so that you who have a penis can talk a little bit more, and you who don't are interrupted a bit more often. So we start. And it's also comes through from the research that bullying is usually related to gender and sexuality. It's also racist. But this is not something that the teachers necessarily have a very good a lot of knowledge on or will to really look at. So there is a need for knowledge. Then I want to talk shortly about whiteness. I started off with Koko Hubara's blog post, and what she really talks about is what does it feel like to be educated in a structure of whiteness. And a Finnish school is of course interesting because not all schools are necessarily seeds of whiteness in a visual sense. I mean, entering this space most can be understood as entering a sea of whiteness. We also have here an all-white panel talking in this very seminar. Our university is very much structured as a white university. And it, of course, it relates to representation in the sense that who we see talking, in what positions. It relates to the knowledge we acquire. It relates to the representations that are in the books that we read. It relates to the geopolitical range from places from which the literature that we read come from. So it's a very Anglo, for instance, in gender studies, you look at it's very Anglo-American. So we have a lot of knowledge from US scholars, but much less from other places in the world. So when we talk about structural whiteness, it is a very complex thing. And when we talk about whiteness, we talk about a relation of power, not a characteristic of people. But school and Finland in many ways is often synonymous with whiteness. Finnishness is very much tied and understood. It is also challenged in interesting ways, but it is still a very hegemonic way to understand Finnishness through whiteness. But now I really need to go further. I think I want to show you the video. Isn't it nice to look at videos? This is a video about, I don't know, it went on in Facebook, so that's my source for finding this. It is about microaggressions, but it is a lot about normativity and not inhabiting the norm, and the effects of living in a structure where you're not really legible, you're not really placed in the structure. So listen to, you can see the effects and the kind of sanctions. The mosquito bites are the kind of sanctions, the punishments that people get from not inhabiting the norm. But listen also to what kind of comments do they say to the people. How are the comments normative?
For people who still don't think that microaggressions are a problem.
Entendez-vous dans les campagnes?
For people who still don't think that microaggressions are a problem.
Oh, you're so well spoken.
Just imagine, instead of being a stupid comment, a microaggression is a mosquito bite.
Ugh, it's a compliment.
Mosquito bites and their itch are one of nature's most annoying features. But if you're only bitten every once in a while...
No, where are you really from?
Cleveland?
Sure, it's annoying, but it's not that big a deal. The problem is that some people get bitten by mosquitoes a lot more than other people. I mean, a lot more. Whether it's on a date...
Oh, your English is so good.
Excuse me?
Going grocery shopping.
You know, everything happens for a reason.
I'm just buying apples.
Commuting to work.
So when are you gonna have a baby?
Watching TV.
We have to keep the Redskins' name. It's part of our culture and history.
Or just walking down the street with your partner.
I couldn't even tell you were gay.
Mosquitoes seem to pop up everywhere.
Do you know John? Give me shopping advice. I love Cher too.
And getting bit by mosquitoes every goddamn day.
Can I touch your hair?
multiple times a day
So pretty. Can
Can I touch it,
hair?
please? Can I please?
is fucking annoying and makes you want to go ballistic on those mosquitoes, which seems like a huge overreaction to people who only get bit every once in a while.
It's just a mosquito bite. Who cares? Just another angry black woman.
Of course, beyond just being annoying, some mosquitoes carry truly threatening diseases that can mess up your life for years.
Astrophysics? Maybe you should try this challenging major.
Ow, my dreams.
And other mosquitoes carry strains that can even kill you.
He looked like he was up to trouble, okay? I felt threatened.
So next time you think someone's overreacting, just remember, some people experience mosquito bites all the time.
You're all so exotic. Wow.
And by mosquito bites, we mean microaggressions.
Okay.
Thank you, Salla. I'm going to interrupt you now.
Yes,
Perfect.
that was my idea that we start.
I'm looking at the time.
Yeah.
Are there any questions from the audience? So, Salla. Yes, one.
My mistake.
You said earlier that bullying is often a matter of sex or of gender or racial or ethnicity. I can see the racial thing, but I was thinking about how can it be a sexistic thing? How can bullying be sexistic? Is it like boys teasing girls, or is it like in which in which matter?
In lots of different ways. I mean, first of all, at least now I'm not so sure about the Swedish language schools, but if boys are bullied with, words, it's usually gay in Finnish. So that's, a sissy boy or whatever. So that's a very gendered and sexualized. I mean, it is about a true man, a proper man is not gay. So gayness is, and then girls, at least it has been a lot, and I'm kind of looking at the teachers here, has been a lot about being called hookers. So it's about sexuality and girls' sexuality. So that's one thing. Another thing is that it's often related to how you're supposed to be, what is a proper girl and a proper boy, how are you supposed to be as a girl, what are the limits. So you kind of get sanctions if you go cross the borders too much. So you're kind of disciplined into behaving like a proper girl or behaving like a proper boy. And they're racialized. And what I didn't come here at all is that how they are intertwined. So they are at once racialized and gendered often. Really good question. Other questions and thoughts?
Okay, I think we will end the lecture part of this seminar because now some of the groups will meet up in seminar rooms. And here you can see where you're supposed to be. If you're yrkeslärarstudent, you will go to F606. K11 går till D404 och så vidare. And international students will join me and Hanna Kaihovirta in D508. But we will have a short break, 15 minutes, and then we will meet up again. But thank you all. I hope you enjoyed the seminar.